Kia ora, welcome to this instalment of the VUWSA Candidates Forum for 2022. Today we'll be talking to the Academic Vice President candidates about their visions and answering some of the questions that you've put to them through the online Dropbox. My name is Neva, I'm with Salient and I'll be hosting today's session. And we're here now with Jessica. Hey Jessica, how are you going?
Hi, 大家好, kia ora koutou, ko Jess toku ingoa, no taina o ke tipuna, kei te noho o ki te whanganui atara. My name is Jess and I am running to be your Academic Vice President for VUWSA 2022. Just a bit about me, I've lived in Wellington my whole life, I am of Chinese descent, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a second year studying Law, Development Studies and Philosophy. I'm running for Academic VP because students are burnt out as fuck. Students, to varying degrees, frequently have to engage with oppressive university structures that aim to make academic engagement a lot less accessible. Students struggle with exorbitant rental prices, the general cost of living, mental health, social life, working to make ends meet, and the individual intersections that mean that each student experience and the concerns that accompany them are all different. So after all that, when we come to look at our to-do list and see that we have X, Y, Z assignments and assessments to do in a badly spaced out time period, our studies become about trying to get a certain grade rather than enjoying the process and what we learn. University needs to be compassionate to students and it should not invalidate students' concerns. Currently, I'm working on 3 core policies that I will carry in all my work as AVP, which are equal partnership, accessibility, and accountability. I think equal partnership looks like listening to, empowering, and giving up space for representative groups' voices and interests. It looks like honouring Te Tiriti and Te Tino Rangatiratanga of Ngāi Tuera. But to begin with, I haven't had any meetings with RIP groups yet, so I don't want to falsely represent how these relationships will look without their input, but I can speak to my values that I would bring to the table in these relationships. I don't believe there should be an obstructive hierarchy between VUWSA and RIP groups, and I would like relationships to be uplifting, two-way rather than merely seeking RIP groups out for consultation, and all-inclusive. VUWSA and its future execs cannot represent everyone at this uni, but should definitely work to make spaces and seats on committees and boards safe and supportive for everyone in the first place. So if RIP groups want to represent themselves in these spaces to promote their interests to the uni, then they won't be harmed by doing so. My second principle, accessibility, is about education at this university being informed by a need to dismantle the different barriers that disadvantage students. It's about keeping a compassionate, equitable, and intersectional perspective. Uni should be about the process of learning rather than unsustainable burnout and focusing on grades. Disclosure sensitivity training, anti-racism training for staff are all really critical for this. So is increasing funding for key student services. I'd also continue to work on improving dual delivery as well. Lastly, accountability means strengthening the accountability relationships between students, RIP groups, VUWSA, and the uni to ensure the issues students really care about are at the centre. VUWSA isn't as transparent or as visible as it needs to be. What's more, students have a right to be kept in the loop because 1, we pay for uni, and second of all, VUWSA execs are elected by students, and so their power is only as strong as the students will it to be. Students have a right to the best representation, leadership, and outcomes. VUWSA itself should be self-accountable to this, and all intersections have to be present at each level of decision-making, and it can't happen without accessible, transparent accountability lines between students, VUWSA, and the uni. So those are my policies, and if you like them and want to see them represented by your academic vice pres, then please vote for me.
Perfect. Thank you for that great stuff. Good to know a little bit about you. We're going to jump into some questions now. These questions have been submitted by the student body. Some of them for all candidates, some of them just for your role, and we'll just be throwing them out there. So you mentioned transparency about the university, and in your campaign blurb you talked about university becoming an ally. What does that look like for you? How will you increase the amount of transparency between perhaps VUWSA and the university or the university and the student body?
Definitely. I think the current situation looks like a lot of students actually don't even know what VUWSA really is, and that is basically reflected by low voter participation turnout and just not knowing in general what VUWSA can do for them. So that's a really, really key issue that needs to be addressed. I think a good way to go about it first is to ensure that there's visibility of work that VUWSA does, and so that's doing things like making sure that there are accessible publications posted on social media, because that's a really great way to engage with students, a lot of information being posted in the hub and so on, And definitely the VUWSA website as well. Some of the documents on there need to be upgraded. And I myself was looking at them coming into campaigning and found that they were actually quite outdated. So the VUWSA website needs to be up to date and it needs to be accessible.
Are there any specific documents that have really caught your attention that you want to jump on when you come in?
Yeah.
Or if you come into as well?
Sure. So I was looking at the executive member statute, which is really important for students to know what each member of the exec, what their role is, and therefore what they can hold those members accountable to. And so there were some, like for example, for my role, there was outdated things about, say, me chairing like a student forum, which doesn't even exist anymore. And so students need to know what mechanisms and what pathways they have to actually communicate with VUWSA, and they need to be like represented properly on the website so that they know where to go, basically. Yeah.
You've discussed dismantling structures that prevent minority students' academic potential and structures in general that prevent students of any particular place from accessing VUWSA and VUWSA's services. Are there any specific structures that you're wanting to target that will make VUWSA as a whole more accessible?
I think often what's even more is that students don't come to VUWSA first. They come through rep groups, and then rep groups have a conversation with VUWSA and talk about how we can like best solve those students' issues. Because VUWSA is like currently, I feel like there's such a big VUWSA hierarchy in terms of how VUWSA seems to sit so far almost like alienated from students to a degree. And so we need to have more like grassroots like contact with students. We need to be on the ground. We need to make sure that we personally are accessible as well, and definitely strengthening like the funding for rep groups and making sure that they are equipped to deal with students who come to them as well, because they might feel more comfortable coming to them and accessing them in the first place. And then that leads on to strengthening the relationships that we have with rep groups.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about having like a two-way relationship with rep groups. How would you facilitate this? What would you do to make that happen? And how do you see VUWSA changing to become two-way? Because obviously the organisation's used to this, like you were saying, so just get that input and then that's where it stops.
Yeah, definitely. I first sort of noticed the situation in the VUWSA Constitution, actually. I think it was in Schedule 7, Section 2. There was talk about how VUWSA can consult rep groups if they need, but rep groups always had to consult VUWSA on policy that they were pursuing that would affect students. And so I felt that that was quite an imbalance in terms of one group having mandatory consultation and one not in the first place. And so first of all, I think that would be a first place to change it on a sort of legislative basis. And then in terms of cultivating those relationships, it means that we're offering support to rep groups when they need it as well, and we're not just seeking them out to ask them whether they want to have any say on like a certain academic issue. It means like at all times my line is open and we should be able to have this conversation whenever you like, and I'm here to support you as well, and you're supporting the people that come to you.
Yeah, great. We're going to move some of the more general questions that we're asking all the candidates today. And the first is, what is a cause or a campaign that VUWSA has championed that has affected you, and how has it affected you?
I think ProctorU definitely is a big campaign. Campaigning against ProctorU being at the university has affected all of us, definitely, in ways that we didn't even know that we would be affected, because I think, again, with the transparency issue, a lot of people probably didn't even know that ProctorU, campaigning against ProctorU was a thing that was happening. And so that meant that for me, it was my university studies were a lot more smooth sailing, and I was able to like study for tests without fear of basically having my privacy invaded, and worrying about if I looked in a certain direction in a certain way. So definitely that has been really great for my studies, and I'm sure that is also probably a lot more beneficial to other students who have say like attention deficiency issues as well, who can't stare at a screen for stare in the same place for a very long time, or
How will students know that you've achieved your goals, and what can, say this time next year when you got in the role, what would they be able to look back and be like, oh yeah, Jessica did it?
Okay. I don't think it would be so much about like, oh, Jessica did that, but just the fact that certain aspects of their university studies that I'd be campaigning on. For example, disclosure sensitivity training and anti-racism training, they would notice the differences in how lecturers and tutors talk to them and the responses they get from emails when they tell their lecturers, oh, I'm really struggling at the moment and I really want another extension. And then to not be put through a process of, are you sure? Can you provide me a medical certificate? All this kind of stuff that inherently aims to invalidate the students' struggles that they've disclosed to these academics. And so I think stuff like that, seeing that policy being enacted in the senior leadership team and then having that follow through down to lecturers and tutors and all staff who engage with students in an academic way, I think that would be how students would probably notice a difference.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any last messages you'd like to pass on to the student body at all?
Just make sure you vote, I guess. Make sure you read up on everyone's blurbs if you have the capacity and you want to, and that you vote for someone who you feel can represent yourself.
Thank you very much. That is Jessica, who is going for the role of Academic Vice President.